They had valid tickets, confirmed seats, and nothing to hide. Yet in front of a silent boarding line, two young black girls were stopped, questioned, and told they didn't belong on that flight. No clear reason. No explanation. Just a quiet decision that felt louder than words. Passengers watched. Staff avoided eye contact. And in that moment, something deeper than a delay began to unfold. But what happened next didn't just challenge the airline. It shook an entire system. Because one phone call would turn everything upside down. The only question is, who are they really stopping? For them, this wasn't supposed to be anything unusual. Just another flight, another routine journey they had taken before without a second thought. The twin sisters had grown up moving through spaces that often underestimated them. Still, they carried themselves with a quiet confidence shaped by discipline, education, and a life that demanded resilience. They were used to curious looks, to subtle shifts in tone, to moments that felt off but were easy to ignore. Most of the time, they chose not to make it bigger than it was. They had places to go, goals ahead of them, and a future that didn't wait for small-minded moments. That morning, everything had been smooth. Check-in was easy. Security was uneventful. Nothing felt out of place. If anything, it felt like one of those rare days where everything simply worked. But sometimes, it's not the beginning that warns you. It's the silence right before something changes. As they approached the boarding gate, there was a shift, subtle, almost invisible. A glance that lingered too long. A pause that didn't feel routine. And in a space filled with people moving forward, they were about to be the only ones asked to stop. At first, it didn't feel real. Just a brief interruption. Something small. Something procedural. A staff member stepped in front of them with a polite but firm gesture, asking them to wait. Everyone else kept moving. Boarding passes were scanned. Names were called. The line flowed forward as if nothing had changed. But for them, everything had. The pause stretched longer than it should have. Another staff member joined. Then another. Their boarding passes were checked once, then again. Screens were glanced at. Subtle whispers passed between employees who avoided looking at them directly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it was unmistakable. Something was wrong, and it had nothing to do with their tickets. Passengers nearby began to notice. Not openly, not loudly, but in the quiet way people observe something uncomfortable. A few slowed down as they walked past. Others stared just long enough to understand that these two weren't being treated like everyone else. Still, no explanation came. Minutes passed. The line disappeared. The final boarding call echoed faintly in the background. And yet, they remained there, stopped, isolated, and increasingly aware that this was no longer routine. Then came the shift. A decision was made somewhere, silently, without their input. Their boarding passes were no longer being examined. They were being dismissed. A quiet instruction followed, one that didn't match the calm tone in which it was delivered. They weren't going to be allowed on the flight. Just like that. No clear reason. No visible issue. Just a conclusion that felt already decided long before they reached the gate. The weight of it settled in slowly. Not confusion, because deep down, they had seen moments like this before. Not shock, because something about the way they were being handled made it clear this wasn't random. It was something colder, more familiar. Around them, the world kept moving. The gate area emptied. The urgency of departure was replaced by the quiet aftermath of a plane preparing to leave without them. And in that silence, the reality became impossible to ignore. They had done everything right, followed every rule, moved exactly as they were supposed to. And still, they were the only ones left behind. That's when the tension changed again. Because this moment, this quiet, controlled exclusion, was about to meet something the airline hadn't expected. Something they couldn't quietly manage or brush aside. A decision had already been made about them. But now, a different kind of decision was about to be made in return. The moment reached its breaking point when the final boarding call faded, and the door to the aircraft closed without them. Just like that, the decision became permanent. The flight they had paid for, prepared for, and rightfully belonged on was gone. And still, no real explanation. What remained was silence. Controlled, calculated silence. The kind that expects compliance. The kind that hopes the moment will pass without resistance. But this time it didn't, because standing there, in that quiet space where they had been reduced to an afterthought, one of them made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of panic, but with a calm certainty that shifted everything. A phone was pulled out. It didn't look dramatic. It didn't draw attention at first. Just a simple action, one that seemed almost insignificant compared to everything that had already happened. But the energy in the air changed the second that call connected. Across the gate, something subtle began to unfold. Staff who had been composed now glanced at each other with uncertainty. Screens were checked again, but this time with urgency. The same people who had avoided eye contact a moment ago were now watching closely, as if something invisible had just entered the room. Because whatever was being said on that call, it mattered. The quiet control the airline once held over the situation started to slip. Small signs at first. A shift in posture. A hesitation in movement. Then something more noticeable. Messages being relayed. Names being mentioned. A sudden tension that no one could hide anymore. The power dynamic had changed.
What was supposed to be a silent dismissal was turning into something far bigger, something that could no longer be contained at a single boarding gate. And as the realization spread, one truth became impossible to ignore. They hadn't just stopped two passengers. They had made a mistake they couldn't undo. What followed moved faster than anyone at that gate could control. The same system that had quietly excluded them now rushed to correct itself. Calls were escalated. Apologies, once absent, began to surface, but they came too late to erase what had already been done. The flight they were denied didn't return. The moment couldn't be undone, but the silence that protected that decision didn't survive. Because what started as a quiet act of exclusion became something visible, something undeniable. The weight of that moment reached beyond the gate, beyond the airport, into spaces where decisions carry consequences. And suddenly, the focus shifted. Not to two girls who were denied boarding, but to the system that allowed it to happen so easily in the first place. For them, the impact wasn't just about a missed flight. It was about standing in a space where they had every right to be, and being treated like they didn't belong. That feeling doesn't disappear with an apology. It doesn't fade with policy changes or internal reviews. It stays. It reshapes how you move, how you trust, how you see the world around you. And yet, there was something else that remained. Not just frustration, but clarity. A reminder that moments like this don't exist in isolation. They are part of a pattern, one that continues in different forms, in different places, affecting people who are often told to stay silent and move on. But what happens when they don't? What happens when a moment meant to go unnoticed is forced into the light? Because this wasn't just about one flight, one decision, or one mistake. It was about a reality many still face, where doing everything right still isn't enough.